Hi all, it's 12:31, so we're going to get started. Welcome to everybody who's joining us today for the Digital Good Network's Early Career Research Support webinar. It's a real pleasure to have folks joining us currently live, but we're also recording this, so thank you to those who are listening to this recording sometime in the future, and welcome today. So my name is Ros Williams. I'm an Associate Director of the ESRC Digital Good Network, and at the ESRC Digital Good Network we do visual descriptions of ourselves so that those with difficulty to see and for any other reason who might not be able to see us can imagine what we look like. I'll just tell you what I look like. I've got short brown hair. I'm wearing spectacles today, mixed race, kind of pale skinned, and kind of butch in my person today. I'm wearing a V-neck sweater that I think is quite fetching. So thank you all for joining and for listening. What I'm going to be doing today is giving a brief overview, really, of some of the details about the Digital Good Research Fund 2024 call, before offering some specific guidance for early career researchers, which is what ECR stands for those who don't know, for early career researchers on how to approach the application form. We're then really lucky to have Dr. Lexi Webster, and she is a recipient of the Digital Good Research Fund 2023 call, and she's going to offer some insights into being an early career recipient of that fund last year, and she's going to talk for about 5 minutes on that. Then we're going to jump over to a live Q&A where you guys can ask questions. As questions start to appear, please do avail yourself of the Q&A function on Zoom rather than using the chat function. It's really important so that we can make sure that we're answering everybody's questions. So as you have questions, feel free to start typing them into the Q&A function on Zoom. Brilliant. So the first thing I think to cover here is to answer the question of who this webinar is for. Now, this webinar isn't really for everybody who's applying for the Digital Good Research Fund. It's specifically for those who are early career researchers, and particularly for those who haven't really got all that much experience in completing an academic funding application, because they're quite unusual objects, really, to work your way through. And if you've not done one before, I think it can be quite intimidating. So with the spirit of trying to support early career researchers and build our research network out, the Digital Good Research Network out, we think it's really important to support you guys to figure out how to navigate these application forms. So this webinar is being recorded. If you have colleagues that you think will benefit from listening to this, they may not be ECR folks, but they may actually have just never written a funding application before. Do feel free to send on the link to them for this, which will be available on digitalgood.net very shortly. So first of all, I think it'll be useful to offer you a bit of an insight into the Digital Good Research Fund 2024 call. I'm going to work quite quickly through this because there are other ways that you can learn some of this information. You can visit some of the other sorts of recordings that we've put together for this particular call and the launch that we've held for it, to learn more information. But just to give you a very brief sense of what this focus is about and this particular call, it's about evaluating the digital good. So we're curious to know whether and how we can evaluate the digital good. We want to know how you might be able to do that across different technologies or contexts, as well how you might incorporate different kinds of communities and sectors in the work of evaluation, and test different kinds of methodological innovations to do that evaluation work as well. Now, that is a very broad scheme that we're thinking through there with the idea of evaluation. And if you have questions about that, you're very welcome to ask those in the Q&A chat. But what I'd like to try and spend today focusing on is how you approach this application form. So do feel free to ask questions about evaluation in the chat, or if you prefer, and it might be more effective to do this, to look back over some of the material that we've already been recording about the Digital Good Research Fund 2024 call for more detail on this. The important thing to flag here, though, is that the teams that we're interested in supporting for this, and this is very much as a team effort, putting together an application here, we expect there to be a principal applicant, so a principal investigator, sometimes called a PI, and we expect there to be co-applicants or co-Is, co-investigators, which we also call co-Is, just in case that some of that vernacular is confusing to you. And in that team of a PI and co-Is, we would expect there to be some interdisciplinarity. We also would expect there to be the promotion of early career research and leadership. And very often, though not always, we would really like it if those applications can connect with communities or organisations that are not themselves academic research organisations or academic researchers. So we might think there of the third sector, people in the private sector or even indeed public services. So thinking broadly about what your team looks like is going to be really important. I'm going to offer a bit more detail about what we mean by that in the rest of this talk. But very briefly, the 2024 call is overall dedicating just under £500,000 of the ESRC investment in the Digital Good Network into this particular call, right? So we're going to be funding a range of projects in this call, just as we did in the last one, that might be funded anywhere between £20,000 and £50,000. If you have questions about what those figures are in brackets there, thankfully we have experts on the call who are able to answer those in more detail. So if you have questions about this FEC, this FEC figure of 80%, then do feel free to ask that in the Q&A. There's also tons of information on our website about what all that means. And if those sorts of things are confusing to you, the research office at your institution as well should be able to make sense of that as well. But broadly speaking, we'll be funding projects between £20,000 and £50,000. The deadline for this altogether will be the 25th of April this year, closing at 4 p.m. Please do ensure that you don't miss that deadline. The deadline will close strictly at 4 p.m, as all of our calls do. And if you've got specific questions about how to download the form and all that kind of thing, you can get that on the digitalgood.net website as well. So I thought what I'd try and do with the rest of this talk is offer a bit of insight into what we're doing with the Digital Good Network and how that dovetails with the application process for the Digital Good Research Fund this year. And one of the things I thought it would be helpful to do here is flag one of the broader objectives we have as a network, which is that we are trying as a network, this is one of the main reasons that we exist, to build research capability to upskill, as we call it, future digital society research leaders in things like methods, in things like leadership, being interdisciplinary researchers, engaging with stakeholders beyond the academy, and ensuring the expansion of representation from currently underrepresented groups. And as part of this, our big focus here is on early career researchers. And many of you who are on this call today will probably describe yourself as an early career researcher or be supporting somebody who is an early career researcher. We believe that it's really important that we channel investment directly at those early career researcher scholars who are kind of coming up the ranks and learning how to do research and do proper, effective, impactful research. And we're really keen to do that through this fund. And that means that one of the things we're trying to do is ensure that any application to the Digital Good Research Fund offers genuine leadership opportunities for a named early career researcher as part of their application. So one of the things that you might be asking is what makes an early career researcher? Obviously, we appreciate that various people will describe themselves as such. We are held in abeyance by UCRI, the UK Research and Innovation, our funder, their guidance on what an early career researcher is. If you go to the call link on our website, you'll be able to actually see in detail how they describe an early career researcher. But I just wanted to flag here the kinds of criteria that would match somebody up with being able to describe themselves as an ECR in relation to UCRI's guidance. So that means you'd need to be within 8 years of your PhD award, and that is from the point of the viva, so when you had your oral examination for the PhD, or having equivalent professional training, which is obviously a grey area, but obviously check out the guidance for more detail on that. We'd also expect people to be within 6 years of their first academic appointments. All of this, bear in mind, does actually exclude any kind of career break. So whether that's to do with family care, like parental leave, other kinds of reasons like health reasons, or indeed COVID-19 and the various implications of that for everybody's lives over the past few years. So it is a relatively expansive category of early career researcher. But what we do require is that people explain why they are an early career researcher in the form. And this is where you have an opportunity to explain in relation to skipping back to those criteria and the others in the UCRI guidance, why it is, skipping back forward here, you are indeed an early career researcher. So if you download the form, you'll be able to see here that what we're asking for yourself and for anybody else in your application team who would be an ECR, to provide a brief justification of how you meet the criteria for being early career. And that allows us as the reviewers of your applications to be able to see indeed that you are early career researchers and that the opportunity and the funding that we're kind of distributing is going to those who will help us to meet that objective of expanding the pool of fantastic researchers in digital society research. So do make sure in that form that you are making it really clear why you are an ECR. But importantly, we acknowledge that although you might be an ECR and you might be named in a bid, just because you do that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a great opportunity for you as a researcher. And in that sense, we don't believe that naming an early career researcher is enough. You also should be integral to the project itself. So how will you as an individual, as an ECR, be developed through the project? And there are multiple ways that you can do that. And the reason I say don't be generic in this advice is that it's not helpful for your reviewer to see you say something like, I will be given an integral leadership opportunity through this. That's not sufficient detail for us. We'd like to know what that is, right? So is that taking ownership of a work package? So for example, if your research project is divided up into discrete sections or work packages, might you be taking charge of one of those? Might it be that you're actually named as the PI or the principal investigator? If so, might that be that you're managing a budget for the first time? Provide detail precisely on why it is that this leadership role is important for your own development. So explain how the project is providing that leadership role for you as the ECR or for the ECRs who are involved in the project. Jumping back to our objectives then, in addition to objective number 3, I'm just going to scooch up that list now to objective number 2, because I think this is also a really important thing to flag here so that you can understand why our application form looks the way it does. So one of our key goals here is to produce, as we say, a step change in digital society research, so that's being centered on the major societal challenges of what we describe as equity, sustainability, and resilience. So I think, sorry, just before I come to this, I'm not going to go into great detail about what we mean by equity, sustainability, and resilience. I could do, we do it quite a lot. And for the reason, and because of that reason, I'm not going to talk about that now. Again, there are other great resources that you can look at on our website, including tons of webinars. We also have a fantastic webinar coming up soon that we can put a link into the chat about sustainability, where you can learn more about how we understand these ideas of equity, sustainability, and resilience. But vitally, what we're inviting people to do with their applications, and one of the things that, and Lexi can, I'm sure, speak to this down the line in her experience, and what their project did really well was kind of frame itself around one of these particular societal challenges. What we're inviting people to do is be able to explain how it is that the research they're proposing dovetails, links in, connects with one or more of those societal challenges. So we're really, really keen in the 500 words section where you have an opportunity to describe how your proposal will contribute to our network, for you to explain precisely how your work will help us to better understand or tackle or explore one of those key societal challenges. So it's really important that you incorporate one of them into your answer. Indeed, it may be that you incorporate more than one of them. What we're not saying is that you have to be able to devise a project that helps us to think about all 3 societal challenges: equity, sustainability, and resilience. We're only funding projects between £20,000 and £50,000. So we're not expecting you to be able to hang the moon here. But what we would like for you to be able to do is locate one of these and drape your project around it, in a sense, to make it really clear how you're helping us to deliver on the vision of the network, how you align with that vision. As well as all of this, it's really important that in your work, you can clarify, in your application, you can clarify that you are taking things like equity, diversity, and inclusion seriously, and indeed internationalization, if that's relevant to your work, seriously. If you have any questions at all about EDI, or which is the acronym for equity, diversity, and inclusion, if you've not heard that before, or internationalization, the best place to look is immediately to kind of hop over to our statements on both of those. You'll learn how we're thinking about those issues and how we believe enacting those in your application can be most effective. So for example, with internationalization, thinking there appropriately about how you ethically engage with researchers in other parts of the world. With EDI, thinking there about how your research is going to incorporate a diversity of experiences or centre those who've been otherwise excluded from research traditionally in the past. So there are different ways that you can sort of operationalize these ideas in your application, but it is vital that you do operationalize them in some sense. We need to be assured as reviewers that you have taken seriously both of those commitments that we have as a research network. So bearing that in mind is really important. As I say, I'm not going to talk in any great detail about these 3 societal challenges, but if you have further information about that, the launch materials on our website will give you far more detail about what we mean by these terms. But do ensure that you're mentioning one or more of those terms where appropriate in your application. Do factor in as well into your thinking here that some of the things that we're trying to do in this particular round is address gaps in our portfolio from the last round of research that we funded. So in the last round of research that we funded, we found that we funded a great deal of work on equity and some work on resilience, but we didn't get to fund research in any large number that focused specifically on sustainability. Now, that's not an invitation for everybody to immediately throw in the towel on their focus on resilience, for example. No, I must do a project that's focused on sustainability, not at all. But what we are saying is that we're particularly keen to encourage applications that focus on that. So if you are somebody who's thinking about putting a project in and that sustainability might be something that you sort of want to think about hanging your hat on there as a kind of a connection to the network, then it will be really advantageous for you, I think, to be thinking about how you can do that in relation to the Digital Good Network, because that is one of our gap areas. So we're particularly keen to encourage applications from there. We won't be funding applications unless they are high quality, of course. So do bear that in mind. We're not just going to fund everything that comes through about sustainability, but that will be one of our kind of key focus areas. Another one just to flag here as well is that we are keen to include projects that are led by or include Black British team members, because that is where we didn't do so well in our last round, according to our EDI data. So do think there about whether you can draw in colleagues who might be able to take on significant roles, right, who might have a Black British heritage background to help us to think about how we can incorporate and widen our research network. But vitally, in completing that form, tell us why that makes sense for your project and how you're ensuring that all of the colleagues in that particular research team are going to be given adequate opportunities to flourish and take on leadership responsibilities. So the other thing I just wanted to flag here is another one of our kind of key focus areas, which is to build and sustain an interdisciplinary network of diverse researchers and stakeholders that produce new insights in how to achieve the digital good. And the reason I flag that is because one of the key things that many of the projects that apply to the Digital Good Research Fund live and die on is the ability to explain how they are interdisciplinary. We're really, really keen, and we are going to be funding research that is interdisciplinary. And it's your opportunity in the form to explain how your proposal is interdisciplinary. So one of the top tips we can give you here is to think really carefully about what interdisciplinarity will bring to your project. So don't just sort of stuff disciplines together in a kind of an urgent bid to be interdisciplinary. It does have to make sense. But we're going to be really excited if you can do that in creative ways that bring distinctive disciplines, so ones that very often don't necessarily come together. So for example, sociology or design or computer science. If you were to bring a project that had those 3 together, I don't think we've really funded anybody who has those three expertise areas together. We're going to be far more excited about a project that does that because it's clearly interdisciplinary, more so than perhaps if a project was solely within the social sciences. So for example, sociology and what I would describe by somebody who is a science and technology scholar as a kind of a sub-branch of sociology, STS, science and technology studies. That would be for me as a reviewer far less convincing of its interdisciplinarity. Bearing in mind that what we're thinking about there is how you can harness interdisciplinarity. So for example, in methodology. So bringing together survey design from psychology with qualitative interviewing from sociology, that would be very intriguing for us, I think, depending upon whether that's appropriate for your answers. But at the same time, bearing in mind where we have gaps. So last year, in our last funding call, we didn't fund much in the way of psychology, geography, economics, or other kinds of STEM disciplines. So we're really, really keen to try and support applicants who are trying to do that. So bear that in mind as you're pulling together your application. Right, so I've chirped on long enough about some of the kind of the key features that I think are really important for you to think about, particularly as an early career scholar. We're going to jump over now to Lexi Webster. And Lexi is a fantastic scholar who is one, as I say, of the funded recipients of the Digital Good Research Fund from our last round in 2023. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to offer the floor to Lexi, and thank you all for listening. So Lexi's going to talk for about 5 minutes. You take the floor, Lexi.
Thank you, Ros. Yeah, I'm Lexi Webster. I'm the Deputy Director of Digital Humanities at the University of Southampton, and I'm also PI on the Queer Joy as a Digital Good project, which was funded by the Digital Good Network last year. As a visual description, I'm a white trans woman with a mug for days and tattoos everywhere. And that's essentially all you need to know. Black hair, bit of a shaved head, needs to be shorn again because I'm growing out, but there we go. So my experience on in terms of applying for funding was really quite interesting. I attended the Sandpit session, which I know has already passed for this year, but was really incredibly helpful in terms of finding other people to connect with. I didn't really have an idea of something specific that I wanted to do until I met the people that I met at the Sandpit. So I went in with the idea that I wanted to do something around a response to political regress and queerphobic hate online. And I met some wonderful people in the first session of the Sandpit, and we were all pretty gladly gay. I mean, we're all very queer together in that particular meeting. We were talking about exactly that kind of thing, that a lot of our research intersected with LGBTQ lives, relationships, and things online. And we responded specifically to something that Helen said at the start of the Sandpit, which was about looking not just to what was bad and what we could fix, but also thinking about highlighting what is already good. And our project on Queer Joy actually came out more of a discussion about what we want to find in our professional lives, more than what we wanted to see as a research topic. So we were talking, for example, about how a lot of our research in terms of gender and sexuality in online spaces lends itself to negativity and also seeing distressing data and difficult research problems because of the state of affairs that we currently see in the online mediascape. So part of what we talked about was finding joy in research, and that led us to the discussion around thinking about queer joy as something for us to explore as a potential mechanism for what we might indicate as a digital good. So that all came from our funding Sandpit, and I think a tip on that, whether you went to the Sandpit or not, and you're thinking about collaborating with other people, is to explore around the topic and not go in with a specific idea. Be open to thinking about how different elements of your professional, your research interests, your personal interests might intersect with how you want to pursue research on this. Of course, the theme this year, or the topic, is more about evaluating the digital good. So there is, I guess, more specificity in how you might approach the kinds of questions you ask. But our approach to writing the application was really quite interesting. We took a very collaborative approach. After the Sandpit had finished, we then met together later on using Teams and decided to engage in multiple ways of writing that application, including collaborating in an asynchronous document sharing app, where we would then just add notes and add comments to each other and use different font colors to indicate who we were so that it was easy to keep track of changes. And also being open to critique from one another. That, for example, my writing, despite being a linguist by training, is often very floral and could do with editing quite often. So a lot of the feedback that I got from my colleagues was to make things clearer or to make sentences shorter, because I do like me a long sentence, especially if we can use semicolons appropriately. That's always nice. So part of my experience really was encouraging other people to come with ideas, to question the assumptions we were making, but also to build in those conversations to what we were having. Because the theme last year was about what is a digital good, or what can be a digital good, the foundations of the digital good, I think, was the phrasing for the call. We were talking very openly and critically or questioningly about what that would mean. And so part of our understanding as primarily early career researchers, so many of us are early career researchers on our team, but also as primarily queer identifying people, we thought very, very differently about what joy might look like. And that became part of the application, was questioning, okay, we don't actually know what queer joy is, other than it being multiplicitous and variable and flexible. And so that was built into the theoretical and even methodological underpinnings of what we did. I can see that the form has actually changed a little bit from last year in terms of describe how you're an early career researcher and how this might support leadership in these different spaces for ECRs. So part of what we did last year was to try to build that into specifically the interdisciplinary section, what makes your proposal interdisciplinary, and also the what does your team get from it, which I think is just the first phrasing of that, where do the ECRs develop here? And so I think the tip there is to be as specific as possible, to say, for example, person X hasn't managed a budget before, and so they're going to lead on this particular thing, or they're going to be the principal investigator because they're managing the budget, or person Y hasn't experienced engagement with policymakers before, and so they're going to take a substantive role in developing the public engagement activity that we've decided to do. So being very specific about how and why this is a helpful thing, not just saying they're going to do it, but why do they need to do it, or why is that helpful for their career ambitions? On our team in particular, we had people ranging from very, very newly minted PhDs to established principal lecturers. And I think that was also a strength of our application, in the sense that we even suggested where the PLs could benefit from help from early career researchers. So really thinking about how the team works together in a holistic way, I think was particularly helpful. Our project ended up being, I think, 7 named people across 6 institutions, which meant that the money didn't go very far. But what we did do with the money was think really about how do we incorporate public engagement and participant engagement, and thinking also, particularly in terms of EDI, and this is something that I tell people in all of my other roles as a research funding reviewer as well, is that it can't just be added on at the end or thought about as, or because we're looking at queer people, that means it's EDI because we're challenging cis heteropatriarchal norms in research culture. But also, for example, thinking about how it might be embedded in your budget. So one of our particular key things was we can't ask participants from local communities to come to us without us giving them some reimbursement for their time and travel. Those are really important things, particularly because we are seeking to host events in the middle of the day, usually in the middle of the working week. And largely that means that a certain element of the community, certain demographics of the community are going to be able to engage with us based on timing, but also certain demographics may not be able to engage with us because of barriers to things like access to transport or access to money. So those are particular things that I think are helpful, is when you're talking about the theme of equity or sustainability or internationalization, is that it's not just something you tack on as a reason for this to be funded. It should be something that is in the absolute foundations of what you do. And thinking about that as you write the application, even as you ideate with people you're intending to collaborate with, will help you to write a stronger application, because there'll be a clearer sense of a thread across the application. I hope Ros agrees that was what we tried to do in our application. There certainly was an intention for us, that it wasn't something that we just had as an added extra. It was something that was directly underpinning the question we asked, directly underpinning the methods we chose, and also directly underpinning the way we allocated budget and spend to these things. So for example, we did allocate timing to every member of our investigatory team, because it was important that even if we ended up doing a lot more work than we allocated, there was a reflection that we expected each member to contribute equally, and it was also a reflection of the intended flat hierarchy that we have within our project team. So nominally, I'm the PI, but in reality, I see myself as an equal co-I with all of my colleagues, which is of course easy to say when you're the PI, but it really is an important thing for us that each of us were named to lead a particular work package. Each of us were named as somebody who would benefit from working with another person, whether that was somebody who was more or less senior or equivalent in career stage, but had different skills. So I feel like I'm kind of blabbering, but I'm sure there'll be questions in terms of, maybe there are questions in terms of my experience, or maybe there are questions in terms of what we ended up deciding, which I'd be more than happy to answer. But I think I've had my 5 minutes, and I'm sure Ros would like to answer Q&A questions.
Thanks, Lexi. That was amazing. Yeah, I'm just, reflecting on my experience of reviewing the DGRF applications, or Digital Good Research Fund applications. I'll be told off if I don't use the full term, the Digital Good Research Fund applications, but also more broadly when I'm reviewing for other funders as well. One of the things I look at, and I think it's probably just important to reinforce here what Lexi said, is costings. It's one of the things actually that is sort of hidden away, I think, sometimes, and it's sort of seen as a kind of an administrative thing. But actually, if you want to do research well, it's expensive pay people adequately for their time, not just researchers, for remunerating those who you're talking to, for example. Costing things appropriately can be expensive. So, we do ask for a lot within the small confines of what we're funding across these projects. But at the same time, we acknowledge that to do something well, it can cost money. So we do look at the costings as well to see that there's kind of equitable distribution of funds across a research team and that's appropriate for the work that's being done, but that helps marry it up with the supposed commitments of the research team. So if you're talking about being equitable in your focus on research, but then your research practices don't include properly paying people for their time, then there's an issue there, isn't there? There's a bit of a kind of a mismatch. So I just wanted to reinforce that really important point from Lexi, is that when we look at an application, we are looking at it as in the whole. And that's not just actually at the Digital Good Research Fund reviewing point, but it's across all kinds of funding applications. These days, it's becoming more and more important across different kinds of funders. So enough of that waffle. I see that I have lots of questions in the box. Some of them, Lexi, are for you, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and jump into some of these top ones about the kind of the status of early career researchers within the context of one of these application forms. The first one from Annabelle is, does the PI have to be an early career researcher? And the answer to that is no. No, a PI could be from all kinds of research, at all kinds of different research stages. Indeed, they might not actually be an academic, but they would have to be based at a recognised research organisation. So the PI and the recognised research organisation, sorry, there is a link to what those are on our website. So it's most universities in the UK and a number of different research organisations beyond universities in the UK. But the PI could be anybody within one of those research organisations if it makes sense for the project. Vitally, though, an early career researcher would have to be named in this project in some form or another. So this means that although you don't have to be the PI or the principal investigator, so I'll try and use the full terms, you would have to be named, hopefully, as a co-investigator. And this helps us to see that a researcher, an early career researcher, has been given fair share, right, to develop their skills, and they're being given an opportunity and a slice of the pie of the research to actually undertake and develop their own skills. So no need to be the PI, but certainly you'd need to be named in the application in that list. And Lexi said they had 7 people in their application. So, they're not necessarily small teams. They don't have to be enormous teams either. They don't have to be at the 7 people. I don't believe that we have necessarily a limit on that, but factoring those names into that list is going to be important. Matthias asked whether a postdoc would be considered as an early career researcher in this call. So Matthias, without more detail on that, I mean, postdoctoral really could be, I suppose, anybody if they've got their PhD. I suppose what I'm thinking there when you're talking about a postdoc is somebody who might be a few years out of their PhD, who's undertaking a fellowship, for example, like this. Would they be considered to be an early career researcher? We will always have to refer to the UCRI guidance on who an early career researcher is. So if that postdoc falls within the criteria elaborated by UCRI, then absolutely they would be. But if they're a postdoc who's been postdocing for upwards of 20 years, say, they've got a permanent role, and they've had tons of PhD students complete underneath them, but they still call themselves a postdoc, probably they wouldn't be. So it would need to be very much on a case-by-case basis, which I think is actually really important, Matthias, because if we used a really kind of static definition of an early career researcher, that wouldn't do justice to the diversity of career pathways that people take on their sort of travel through academic life. I don't think any 2 career pathways look exactly the same, and we're trying to use a kind of a more capacious definition of early career researcher, which hopefully captures many people who identify as one. Ludovico is asking, in terms of current career status, is it required for applicants to be in permanent posts, or is it open to fellows or also to postdoctoral research associates, PDRAs? So first, on the first point there, the first question that Ludovico is asking here, do applicants need to be in permanent posts? No, they do not. You would need to ensure that your university was supportive of your application and enabling you to work for the period of time that you were funded for. And very often it might be that you cost in the salary of the ECR who is doing that work. So you can see details about what kinds of things can be costed in a Digital Good Research Fund call. And one of those things might be, where appropriate, the salary of a person involved. So no, they do not need to be in a permanent post, but you would have to have a named research organisation that person was affiliated with. And so in effect, you wouldn't necessarily just be able to sort of be an independent researcher applying for these funds. So you would need to be attached to a university. The important thing, we're at the end of February now, the deadline is a couple of months away. There's still time to have these conversations. But the important thing is to be having conversations with your mentors, people in your department, your research office, to clarify what the specificities are in enabling you to take on this if it's successful. But you wouldn't need to be in a permanent post. And the point here that Ludovico asks about fellows and PDRA specifically, jumping back to Matthias's question there, it all depends upon whether they fall within the bounds of being an early career researcher. So Ludovico, you've offered an example here. You were a PDRA on a project. Can I apply? And if so, what would that mean for your current employment in the project breaks, if the project breaks and a new employment starts? So these are questions that would have to be asked directly with your own university, with your own research office, to clarify those points. But very often we have applicants who are applying, who are currently a postdoctoral research associate or assistant on another project, who are thinking, I'd like to apply for this. They'd absolutely be eligible to do that if they can fit within the broader scope of the call. So it's absolutely fine to do that, but it is something you'd need to clarify with your own institution, and your research office at your own institution will be adequately equipped to be able to answer those questions for you within the institutional context that you work in, Ludovico. So now that I have answered a couple of those questions, I see a question for Lexi, and it's from Adam Cox. Lexi, I'll read it out for you. It's a question for you. Adam says, could you speak about how you focused on one or more of the three challenges, so equity, sustainability, or resilience, in your application? That'd be all right, Lexi, to take that one.
We absolutely had some struggles with this in terms of was our project more about equity, or was it more about resilience? And eventually the application did talk about the two as being directly related in the particular context we were looking at. So we were talking about queer joy as a mechanism for resilience, but a mechanism for resilience as an act against ways of doing social inequity that have found themselves platformed online at the moment. The way that we built that in was to make it absolutely clear why we thought this was both things, and what that meant for the digital good network. So we talked about, for example, the inherent inequalities in platformed hate, but also how joy acts as a mechanism for both individual and collective resilience, and therefore by enhancing, or by which one of our outcomes is thinking about how we might benchmark how digital technologies explicitly facilitate queer joy, how that then works as an act of facilitating resilience for platforms and for people. And what I will say as well is that in the former application, I don't know what the current application looks like, but in the former application, the second question essentially was, how does your proposal contribute to the digital good network? And that's where it talks about how does it respond to societal challenges. It's not only in that section that we talked about equity and resilience. And I think that's the important thing, is that the way we framed it was that each of the responses made an explicit, or at least some kind of statement towards why this would enable equity, or why this would enable resilience on the part of not only digital society, but also thinking specifically about the kinds of people that might be impacted, including users and platform professionals and policymakers. So we quite early on decided that it wasn't a sustainability project, although sustainability in its multiple variations could easily have been embedded. But I think trying to do too much with it would have meant we couldn't have made as strong a statement about why it's a project grounded in equity and resilience. So that would be my response to that, is essentially we focused on it by being so clear. I mean, one thing that I say to people all the time in my anonymous reviews of research funding is, I'm missing a so what. So I get it, what you want to do, and I get that it fits within the research, but so what in terms of impact or outcome, or why this is relevant or appropriate here. And I think we tried our best to put the so what in there, and that meant that we had to connect it through each of the different questions. So in essence, the application isn't a series of disparate questions. We treated it as an entire narrative that was perhaps punctuated by headings, which were questions, if that made sense.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Lexi, because I think an important thing to remember here, just to sort of reinforce what Lexi said, is that the form itself is an opportunity for you to sort of showcase the proposed research. We have to do it in this way because we read absolutely tons of them, and there are only so many hours in the day, and so we give everything a word limit and we give it titles to help you. But it is your object to do with what you want to tell this story, and find all those opportunities that you can to try and draw in those key characters that we're inviting you to introduce in your research, right? So whether that is equity or resilience or sustainability. And although that, as Lexi says, in this particular application now, it's what you'd look at question 3, how does your proposal contribute to the digital good network? And let's say you're offering a proposal about sustainability. That can't be the only place where you mention sustainability. Sustainability has to be almost like a spine that wends its way through the entire thing for us to be able to see that you're taking that challenge as seriously as you possibly can. So Lexi, that's a really helpful insight. Thank you very much. And if others have questions about Lexi's experience, then we've got her for the next 19 minutes. So throw them in the chat. But I see some other ones coming in here. So for those, let's have a look here. Can people outside of the UK apply to the call? Is there any criteria about people who can apply? So Mesfin, just to answer that question for you, who can apply for the call? It's a very broad, it's a very kind of broad opportunity really to apply for the call. I believe you could pretty much apply from anywhere. However, the PI and the nominating institution, the institution that hosts the PI, with whom the Digital Good Network has a contracting relationship with for the funding for various different reasons, has to be a named UK research organisation. And those organisations are listed on the website. So Mesfin, absolutely. You can go on our website and you can see we have funded projects where there are colleagues working in everywhere from Argentina to South Africa who are co-Is on these, but the PIs are actually tend to be based in the UK. So, well, they are all based at UK research organisations. So Mesfin, absolutely, you're welcome to join a team and apply, but you'd need to anchor it with a PI who's based at a UK research organisation recognised by UCRI. Go on digitalgood.net, look at the name, you can find a link to that list of research organisations. An anonymous attendee has asked if we could offer some advice on those of us who are, for those of us who are currently research associates, who are currently employed on specific research projects on fixed-term contracts, and how applying for funding like this works when your current contract doesn't extend to the timeline of the project. Right, so I can offer a little bit of advice on how I would have approached this in your context. This is all going to be very heavily institutionally specific, right? So the institution that you work at, let's say I'm based at the University of Sheffield. If I was in a situation where I was the named RA on somebody else's project, let's say it was a Leave a Hume research project and I was the named PDRA on it. So I would talk to my mentor who I work with, who might actually be the PI on that project, and explain that I'm really interested in this project. I've got a team that I want to work with. I'd like to do it through Sheffield, ideally. Then they could explain the process, which would be working with our local research organisation, who could give us a sense of the timelines for getting all of the things costed and all that sort of thing. In this context, you would need to be thinking about how you're going to live whilst you're doing this research. So you would need to be salaried by the project when you're doing this. This will be different for people who are on permanent contracts, who might, as part of their contract, have a time in their sort of working week where they're doing research, if they're on a research and teaching contract. It sounds like our colleague who's asked this question, that you're not in that situation, where you're there and you're being paid to do research on somebody else's project. What you're trying to do here is develop an opportunity for yourself to spend some of your working week, or perhaps all of it if this is coming to an end, working on a different project, your own project, which would be funded by the Digital Good Research Network. You're not the only person who has attempted to do this through this fund. It is an appropriate fund to do that, but you would need to be thinking about how you cost in your own time to that. This would all be about working with your own research office. So each institution would have a research office that would have supported the PI, the project you're working on, to get their funding, and they can tell you the exact specificities of what you need to do. But you are exactly the sort of person that we want to support with this call. That is the kind of encouragement I would give you. But I can only really give you very high level advice at this point. If you have any very specific questions about how to make that form work in the context of your own situation, first of all, your research office is the person to go to. Second of all, you can get in touch with us at info@digitalgood.net for any particular questions about the call and how you marry up with it. So I hope that that is in some way helpful, but just to assure you that you're exactly the sort of person that we are looking to support with this scheme. Charlie is asking whether to be named on an application, you have to be in a position at an academic institution, or if you can be an independent researcher or a returning researcher. And they're asking the same of that for fellowships. Okay, so I'll just park the question on fellowships and return to that in just a moment. But yes, you absolutely can be named on an application if you are not at an academic institution, or if you're an independent researcher or a returning researcher, which sounds like perhaps you're just kind of coming back into academia and you're trying to find a foothold there. Yes, you'd be absolutely allowed to apply for this funding, but most likely as a co-I, because what we're looking for here is applications that have a PI who's at a UK research organisation. And again, I've already said that, I don't want to belabor the point, but you can go on the website to find out who's on that list. But Charlie, you would absolutely not be excluded on those grounds, but you would need to locate a team to kind of nest yourself in where that kind of box is being ticked about eligibility because of the UK research organisation criterion. David asks whether they'd fund projects with significant shares of research expenses, so to buy access to commercial databases. I don't see why that wouldn't be something that we could do. Bearing in mind that it's a relatively modest amount of money that we can fund an individual project for, we'd need to have a really clear justification of why that was a sensible spend of the money for that, and whether there weren't other ways to work around that project. But bear in mind as well that what we're trying to do is support people who might have interest in accessing and using databases, pre-existing databases, to do secondary analysis, using kinds of methods that we haven't funded a great deal of. So if you're a more quantitative researcher, then it could be advantageous for you to describe this in terms of kind of using secondary research processes. So I don't see why we wouldn't do that, but you'd need to offer a good justification of why you're asking to use such a large proportion of your funds to access that data, and why it's necessary to ask the bigger question, to answer the bigger questions you're asking, that then of course relate back to one of or more of the three societal challenges. So David, it's sort of it's a non-committal answer there, but it's certainly not a no. So do think about whether you can make the case for that whilst also meeting the kind of the scope of the call and the other kinds of the criteria that we judge applications against. Another anonymous attendee asks whether the ECR needs to be employed by a research organisation, or can they be employed through the funding? I think I've already addressed this. Yes, you can be employed through the funding, but that funding does go to the research organisation with whom you would then need a contractual relationship with to receive that as a wage. So it would work out something like you becoming an employee of a research organisation to access the payment for doing that. So we wouldn't necessarily set up an independent we think we have in the past set up independent relationships with researchers in particular contexts. So if you have a specific question about that, that might be something you'd need to address to info@digitalgood.net if you're, say, an independent researcher as part of this. But as I understand it, what you're asking here is whether you're floating free currently without any institutional affiliation. Can they then be employed through the funding? You would do, but if you were the PI, you'd have to be named through a research organisation who would then have to have committed to saying, yes, absolutely, you can join us. We're happy to be the contracting organisation with the Digital Good Network, and then have a contractual relationship with you where you're paid a wage monthly through kind of pay as you earn in the UK. I hope that makes sense, and I hope I've understood the question correctly. But of course, if not, then do feel free to re-ask it in other words, or probably, given the time, send it as an email. Can you confirm if the PI, co-I and people in the team need to be only in UK institutions? I can't confirm that because that's not correct. The PI does have to be in a UK institution, absolutely, a UK research organisation that's recognised, but co-Is and other members of the team can be from other parts of the world. As I said, we've funded research projects through last year's call, Lexi's call, that have worked in different continents, South America, South Africa as well. We have co-Is that are based around the world. Azza is asking, is it possible to get involved in creating a digital collaboration platform for all the interested researchers from the sandpit and today to brainstorm and collaboratively end up with ideation, team forming and proposal writing? Azza, that sounds like a great idea. I don't know that we've got the resource to do that at this current time. And given where we're at now, so the sandpit was time to sort of give people that lead up. I don't think it's too late to do that, but it is something you probably would have to be thinking about doing yourself. I can have a chat with our team and think if there are any other kinds of productive ways to sort of help people to build those connections. But we've limited resource to be able to do that, and we try the best that we can. But I can just say now, if you've got an interesting topic area and you would love to collaborate with other people, feel free to pop that into the chat. And if anybody's interested who's on this call, they can get in touch directly with you if you want to pop that information into a chat for people who are here. Ludovico is asking another question. This has been very helpful. A variation of the previous question on PDRAs, postdoctoral research associates. If I currently a PDRA were to apply as a PI, how would that change the eligibility and the type of position contract type that would generate? Ludovico, I am afraid you would have to ask your own research organization a question like that. To my mind, it doesn't really change much in the way that we operate as the Digital Good Network, right? So if you are the PI, if you are the co-I, if you have a salaried kind of buyout portion of the funding is going to be used to pay some of your salary, then there would have to be a contractual relationship between us as the Digital Good Network, between your research organization, and then your research organization would have to have a separate contract with you as an employee of that research organization. Whether you're the PI or the co-I, I don't believe really makes all that much practical difference. But again, your research organization can offer you a bit of detail on that. We have a little bit of time left as well. My colleague Ruth is just reminding us, if there are other questions, then please do feel free to slot those into the Q&A chat now. But somebody here has asked, for those who missed the Sandpit event, would it be possible to riff a bit more on the idea of evaluating the digital good? So someone sounds like they're asking me to riff on the idea of evaluating the digital good. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I can give you a bit of a sense of what it is we're trying to achieve with this particular call, if that's an invitation. One of the kinds of the key things that I think is important to flag here is that what this call is not necessarily inviting. It may be that some of the projects we fund do this, but we're not necessarily saying that you have to do this. We're not saying that you have to evaluate something necessarily. What we are asking for you to do is interrogate this idea of evaluation and help us to develop a better understanding of how we go about doing it in a broad range of contexts. So anything from, say, like AI in education through to the use of telehealthcare in hospitals, right? You could just evaluate those using existing evaluation methods for a particular intervention that's already been designed. Or more broadly, you could be asking questions about what it is we mean by evaluation, how methodologically you get at the question of evaluation, how you do evaluation. We're really, really keen that you think this through with us. And this is the kind of project that we're going to be supporting that allows us to think about evaluation. Now, I know that sounds incredibly meta and a bit sort of like high up level here. And the reason it sounds like that is exactly the same reason it sounded like that when we were talking about the first funding call, because we didn't know the projects that we would receive. We didn't know what projects we would ultimately fund. So we didn't know what the kind of the landscape would look like. The invitation is to researchers to try and imagine what it is we might mean by this idea of evaluation in designing their own research projects around it. So don't feel like you have to do an evaluation. This is about much more than that. It's about interrogating that idea of evaluation itself. And bearing in mind that some of the things we are interested in are sort of new and interesting ways of doing evaluation that can help us to think through one of the key things that we're focused on as a network, which is the Digital Good Index, which is another resource that we're currently developing and that you can learn more about on our website. So I hope that's probably not as interesting as you imagined a riff to be. I feel like that was just more of a spiel than a riff, but hopefully it sort of kind of gets to a little bit of the detail that you were inviting. Matthias asks a question, if I'm hearing correctly, the Sandpit has already occurred. You are hearing correctly, Matthias. It did occur indeed earlier on this month. Is there a space to get to know potential project partners? I'm seeing here from some questions. I'm seeing some questions here about how do we connect people together? And I think that there may be some appetite for us to think about how we can continue to do that over the next couple of months. I'm not quite sure how we do that. I'm not the greatest at thinking on my feet. So if I can offer those listening who are interested in that, the assurance that we will go away and have a little bit of a think about how we might be able to do that with the remaining time between now and the end of the call, we can do that. One of the things I would really love just to kind of flag, though, is that these kinds of applications, and I'm sure Lexi will agree, take quite a lot of time to put together, even ones for a relatively small amount of money. I say relatively small because although if you win like a £30,000 grant, that's amazing and obviously enormous, but grants come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and it doesn't really matter all that much how big the grant is. There's always tons of work that goes into it, particularly a more complicated one like this, where we're asking you to kind of compile a team and all that sort of thing. So the reason I have a little bit of hesitation about trying to kind of put on more events that help people to connect at this point is because we're now just under 2 months away from the deadline. And the reason we timed the sandpit when we did is that it would give people sufficient run up. And that's not to alarm people that you already have to have your team assembled, but it is to tell people that it is going to take a significant amount of time for you to put together the sort of the intellectual project you want to do, and wrap that around the bones of a research project that actually has to be costed by your individual institution, the various bits of labor that go on internally to review it and that sort of thing. It can be quite tricky. So yes, so there are some questions there that I've answered. I do recall now that I didn't answer a question about the fellowships, about international folks applying for our fellowship scheme. The fellowship scheme isn't what we're talking about today, but I will just flag it very quickly. Aside from the Digital Good Research Network, the Digital Good Research Fund, we also have a fellowship scheme that's launched, and that's an invitation for colleagues to apply to join one of the core team researchers from the Digital Good Network at their institution, either in the UK, and we have a colleague in the US as well. And applicants to that may well be outside of the US. And indeed, we've ring-fenced half of the funds there for colleagues who are in what we're calling the Global South, which obviously just means the global majority of people. You can get more details about what we mean and which countries are in the list of the Global South there. So yes, we're absolutely interested in supporting international scholars for the fellowship scheme. Marielle has asked a quick question here about opportunities for PhD students beside the summer school. I'd love to get more research experience and collaboration. Marielle, you are in luck. Year after this one, so next year, we will run our internship scheme again. I believe that's the plan. So last year we ran an internship scheme. This year is a fellowship scheme, and next year is an internship scheme again. The internship scheme is open to PhD students. So you would take a leave of absence from your PhD, and then you would undertake a period of, I can't recall off the top of my head, I think it's a 3-month internship. There's more details on the internet, on the website once that scheme launches. But Marielle, there are absolutely other opportunities to get involved with us. The other thing to mention here is that we have a kind of a suite of activities and events over the course of the lifetime of the network, and we would encourage you to join the mailing list as well to see when those opportunities are and come along and make your voice heard when we have those events. So hopefully that covers that question, Marielle. So I see that I have worked through the entire Q&A. We are exhausted and there are no open questions, but I see some folks have asked questions in the chat. I'm just going to have a really quick look through there and see if there is anything there. But I see that colleagues, we have invisible colleagues on the call, Nikki and Ruth, who are our fantastic Digital Good Network administrators who keep the network going. So thank you for doing that for us. So it looks as though we've worked our way through all of the questions. We've got 3 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is say thank you all so much for listening. And for those who have just said thank you in the call, so Delia, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun to host this. I'd also just like to say an enormous thanks to our colleague Lexi, who's one of the fantastic scholars that we funded through the Digital Good Research Fund. There is a link somewhere in the chat here. I see to Lexi's project and her colleagues, so you can learn more about the fantastic work that they're doing. And I would just like to say a final thank you to Nikki and to Ruth for running this excellent webinar. Thank you to everybody who is listening to this today, both live and who's taken the time to listen to this afterwards. Thank you to those who are now going to share this with their colleagues as well. And I wish you all a happy and healthy rest of your February. So take care, everybody, and thank you. Goodbye.